wealth is a state of well-being, right? It comes from the old English root wella. It is not the accumulation of more possession. It's a state of well-being. And money is a tool and a technology. It is one of the many resources we use to create this state of well-being. It's a really important resource, but it can't be the scorecard of our wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. And that message is in direct opposition to everything that we have been raised to believe.
Welcome to Behind the Author Brand, a limited series where we take a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to be an author these days. Join me for meaningful conversations about exactly how real authors navigate their careers, marketing, branding, promotion, community building, and so much more. I'm your host, author brand strategist and expert, and also writer, Andrea Guevara. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to share with you our guest today, Elizabeth Husserl. Elizabeth Husserl is a registered investment advisor and co-founder of Peak 360, a boutique wealth planning firm. She expertly guides people to a deeper understanding of their relationship to money and wealth. And more than anything, she loves her life. Elizabeth's debut book, The Power of Enough: Finding Joy in Your Relationship to Money, is a paradigm-shifting exploration of how our relationship with money impacts our overall well-being, and explores the financial systems that hinder our pursuit of experiencing wealth and genuine satisfaction. I'm so excited to have you here today, and we get to talk about your book and all the amazing things that you've accomplished. So thanks for being here.
Oh my goodness, it is such a pleasure to be here and to connect and share with your community. I feel like your community was a big part of getting my book to where it is, so I'm excited to give back.
Yay. Well, I'm so glad you're a part of it. Okay, so let's talk about your book, The Power of Enough. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about something we talked about before we even worked together, which was this idea of financial wealth and mental wealth.
Mm.
And before I ask the question, I guess I should say, from someone coming from my background, that was one of my trigger points when I
Mm.
first saw your information was, okay, what does this person have to say for someone like me who's had some lack of privilege around money in the past, some financial abuse in the past? I'm always leery of financial advisors who don't take into account these things. And I'm hitting you with like the toughest question first, but I know it's because you have such a good perspective. So
Mm.
tell us a little bit about that. What does that mean
Yeah,
to
I mean,
you?
it's such a great question, and I actually get like shivers when you ask it because it's such a vulnerable and important one. And I wrote this book because I wanted to normalize the idea that wealth and money are different things. And I think that's really important because there's so much importance placed on money. We scapegoat money, and there's so much abuse and confusion and shame around money. And we collectively as a culture have decided that that's what makes us wealthy. And I think I wanted to argue something different. I was like, no, financial stability is one slice of the pie, and it's a really important one, right? And we do need to face the traumas and the stories and the strategies and to roll up our sleeves and do our work here. But that's one slice of the pie of how we can redefine wealth, if wealth is a state of well-being. And so, without even knowing the full spectrum of what you went through, Andrea, what I could say is that if I can help someone understand that perhaps they're wealthy in other areas, in purpose. I know you're super freaking wealthy in your purpose. You know what you came here to do and how you participate in your connection, in your belonging, in touch, right? In different areas that it doesn't necessarily solve the trauma and the financial stability, but it gives you a wider perspective. It gives you resilience. It gives you strength to then turn to the slice of the pie and say, okay, you know what? I got what it takes to face this. Versus if money is what defines wealth, and that's where you have trauma, we start to feel really small and we start to feel unworthy and we start to feel full of shame. And so part of what I want to do is to normalize, to be like, hey, maybe this slice of the pie isn't where you were dealt the best cards. but maybe you were dealt better cards in other areas. What are the strategies that you're using to satisfy these areas? How do we use that wisdom, that resilience, that strength to bring it and actually start to tackle the trauma, the hurt, the pain of financial stability from an angle where your cup is full versus where your cup is lacking? Because that doesn't help our experience of scarcity. If I attack it from a place of lack, you're like, wait a second, I'm only compounding that experience. If we address it, and attack was probably the wrong word, but if we address it from a place of I actually feel full in other areas, you just approach it, you approach it from a different framework.
Yeah, absolutely. So this makes me think of if a few of the buzzwords you've used here, shame and scarcity and things like this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you define this abundance scarcity cycle concept?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would start by really kind of defining the framework of scarcity, right? Because I think that's the first piece that we're often kind of reacting to. And what ends up happening is that we want to push scarcity away by grabbing onto abundance. And you can, if I kind of go back a little bit so you can see my body, I'm pushing by grabbing. And I'm still tight, right? This is not Shavasana yoga. This is not a relaxed pose. And so what I like to tell people is like, let's go back to the beginning and say, okay, we have a scarcity brain, right? Michael Esther writes about this in his book called The Scarcity Brain. And we're stuck in this dopamine loop that we want, we get, and we want more. And we get stuck in this loop. And funny, what he pointed out is that it's the dopamine that we get from the anticipation of something that keeps us wanting to go into the dopamine. And so it's in the anticipation, we want more of it. And we get stuck in this like scarcity of like, I need. And what I like to tell people is that this is not a moral failure, right? It's biology. And so the way to help you regulate the scarcity abundance loop is to lean into heart coherence, right? And so we can help address scarcity through practices of gratitude, seeing what you have in your life that's working. And we can also help address scarcity of our mind with body resonance. And by understanding what are those things that you do in your life that satisfy you, that satiate you, that's a visceral feeling. And when you bring the heart and when you bring the body into the equation, our mind realizes, whoa, I'm not having to make all these decisions by myself, right? The mind is a great center to plan, to optimize. It's what we use in financial planning, but it keeps us almost on edge because it's kind of that survival mode. Whereas the heart and the body can help us relax and be like, oh, let me sense instead of seek, right? Let me satiate instead of craving more.
I love that so much. This is one of the ways that I think you're very different than other financial advisors. And I've read a lot of financial advice books, trying to undo the systems that were within me. And few really move the needle, in my opinion. And yours is one of them that I think has taken some of the really great concepts, the things that helped me shift the most in my life around mindset. And then you took it to a whole different level, which I just have to say, personally, I am going through my own evolution of just realizing how much energy matters. And this is what you're teaching. I mean, it's not just in our minds, it's in our bodies, it's in our energy. All of these things are interacting. And I would love if you told us just a little bit more about this idea of heart coherence.
Right. So heart coherence. So there's this nerve in our heart center called the vagus nerve. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Vagus, right?
Yeah, Vegas.
Am I
Yeah,
okay? But yes, but I'm like Vegas. Sorry, it kind of sounds like Las Vegas. So I like Vegas,
it
but we'll
does.
see. But it's one of the longest nerves in our whole cardiac network. And what it does is that it connects the heart and the mind and allows us to go into a rest and digest state instead of a flight or fight. And so I remember doing this research and I was like, oh, what is this rest and digest? I'm like, I want more of that. And what ends up happening is that the more we start to feel gratitude and empathy and compassion, right? And we literally slow down the beating of our heart by regulation, our cortisol levels decrease. And so the anxiety that our brain, I mean, like, God bless our brain, it is meant to keep us alive. Like, we are having this conversation, Andrea, because our ancestors survived, right? They figured out how to be here, and we figured out how to be here. So our brain has such an amazing role. But if it's the only thing that's running the ship, we will stay in scarcity. And so we just have to normalize that and come back to what's the role of my heart and experiencing this coherence of gratitude, compassion, empathy, of connection, of belonging, seeing that as a resource, an economic resource that helps our experience of the economy, which is basically the management of the household. If I'm my household, how do I manage all the different parts of me to feel more in the present moment, satiated, satisfied, whole, and content? And when I do that, right, what we start to do is that we start to see that wealth is a state of well being, right? It comes from the old English root wella. It is not the accumulation of more possessions, it's a state of well being. And money is a tool and a technology. It is one of the many resources we use to create this state of well being. It's an important one. And half of the book is like, how do you improve your relationship to money, right? What are the things we can do? Because it's a really important resource, but it can't be the scorecard of our wealth.
Yeah. And that message is in direct opposition to everything that we have been raised to believe, at least as people who've grown up in the United States or spent most
A
of their
hundred
lives in the United
percent.
States.
And and I'm the first one to say my industry has a role to play in that and how we define economics, right? I was taught at 16 economics is the allocation of scarce resources. As a 16-year-old, I was like, that's interesting use of words. As a financial advisor, I'm told we call investments securities, right? My big compliance umbrella is the Security Exchange Commission. I'm like, that's an interesting thing to agree upon, that investments is what makes me feel secure, right? We talk about net worth, and I'm like, that's an interesting thing. No wonder we confuse self-worth with net worth. So my industry has a huge role to continue this cultural Kool-Aid that we drink. And so I wrote the book to start to just ask those deeper questions and to dream up of a generation that maybe talks about finance and wealth and money differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important. Any kind of positive change has to start on an individual level before it can reach a communal or universal level. And obviously, we're in a very tumultuous time when it comes to talking about economy and wealth and the disparities in our nation. And I can't encourage people enough to read the book. And I'm not just saying that, I'm saying that for a reason, because it's the way we shift everything is by shifting ourselves. And this is a way to take back our own personal power in a way that is the natural order of
Yeah.
who we are as human beings. We are communal creatures. We're not individuals who do best on our own, hoarding for ourselves, right? You look back at
Hmm.
ancient cultures and the way they did things, everything was communal, everything was
Yeah.
shared, and wealth was a completely different concept before, we entered into like more feudal and types of systems that we have now.
100%, and it's going to take a full spectrum of different professionals, right? Like, I'm not necessarily a policymaker, but may my book inspire policymakers to bring this to the Capitol and to make different choices and policies, right? Like, because there is frustration, especially going through what we're going through right now in our country, where there is a bigger divide. And I wrestle with that because, it's going to take a lot of creative thinkers to figure out how are we going to reset some of the divides that we feel in our country. But I think giving people language, to chew on and to collectively, and that's what I've been told, Andrea. People are like, "Oh, you've put into words things that I intuitively feel, but I didn't have words for." I mean, I think that's the beauty of books, and and
Yes.
that's where it took me 10 years to write this book, and so many iterations, because I was like, I have something to say. How do I make it coherent and clear, and give readers a journey for them personally, but give them language and framework that they can share with other people?
Yeah. When I hear you talk about that 10 years, I mean, it's such a long time, but it makes sense because I feel like you're a type of archaeologist. Like, I feel like you
Oh,
you
yeah.
are going back and uncovering
Yeah.
what is this belief system that we had before the world changed it,
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
society changed it, you know?
Well, and I love that you use that word because one of the exercises that I talk about in the book is having people write their money story, right? And I tell people, be an anthropologist when you write that money story, because coming back to one of your first questions is like, especially if you have money trauma, right? We have to write that story out because we have to validate it did happen. You are not crazy. Right. And yet you don't have to make future decisions based from that hurt place, but we have to work with the hurt. And so a lot of times
Yeah.
when I tell people, and I have again on my website for free, download the money story template and do it. Is when you write out the story, I always tell people just sit down and write as much as you can in one or two sittings, then put it aside for just 2 days, right? Like, because it's emotional, it's cathartic to write it. After you've given yourself a couple days to digest and metabolize that, come back to it and read it as if it were your best friend, as if your
Mm.
best friend said, "Hey, I'm feeling really vulnerable. I want to share my story with you. What do you see? What would you tell me?" And there's just something that shifts, Andrea, when I say that. It's like we activate the heart coherence, and there's a compassion of like, wow, yeah, oh my gosh, resilience, strength, compassion. All these things come up when we start reading the story as if it were our best friend, because we want to love our best friend and we want to be there and support them. And that's a very cathartic exercise because you just see your own story in a different light.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna read a quote from Forbes where you were quoted,
Mm.
where you say, "We've confused the tool with our identity. Credit scores have replaced trust. Bank accounts are used to measure personal value, but money was never meant to carry that kind of emotional burden." I mean, that's
I'm like,
such
mic drop.
it cuts right to the chase. You know?
It
Yeah.
does. It does. Thank you for quoting that back to me. It's almost like you read me my money story and I got to hear it again. But yeah, we have confused the tool with our identity.
Yeah.
And I think it
And
goes back
just
to your first question, right? And because if we're so wounded by that tool, then we assume our identity is wounded, right? But if we can be like, actually, I'm so much bigger than the tool, I can then address that slice of the pie and be like, yeah, that sucked. That was painful, right? I don't want to wish that on anyone, but it doesn't define me. And I think that's the key. Money doesn't define you. It's a very important tool, but it doesn't define you.
yeah, it's really interesting because just reading that is profound for me. And what's interesting, aside from how much that can impact you, just that even that last line that it wasn't meant to carry the emotional burden. I know this is going to sound funny, but it crosses over into the work we do around branding because it's the same core idea as you are deriving your identity from something. And, the number one thing authors will say is, "I'm not good at social media." That's what they think of when they think of marketing or branding. And even in that statement, "I'm not good at social media," there's a statement about their identity, right? And
Mm.
it's a tool.
Mm-hmm.
Money is tools, marketing methods are tools, but they're not identity. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the more we embody that, like you're saying, and own it, the more freedom we have in all different aspects of our life. We start to see those patterns everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if we separate the use of the tool just for like the tool, right? Like we use marketing and social media, but it's more like what's the branding, the marketing? There's a certain fun that comes out of it because you get to use marketing to express yourself, right? That's kind of how I see it. And there's hardness to it as well. Cause I was like, okay, you do have to kind of like pull out some of the main ideas, which is what I found so helpful in going through the program with you. Andrea is like going through all the different exercises helped me fine tune what it is that I wanted to say. But then once I had those core ideas, I'm like, okay, let me go into Squarespace and figure out what templates and what are my colors. And it actually became, for me, a super fun exercise because the brain was exhausted from writing the book. I got to bring out my body and my heart and be like, ooh, I'm gravitated to this. I'm attracted to this. And it became a different creative exercise that complemented the writing in the book.
Yeah. I think getting back in touch with who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's being a financial advisor or writing a book or bringing that book to the world, like you said, it frees something up within you that you can look at things in a different way. And I love that you do that with the idea of wealth and abundance and,
Mhm.
being sustained. I would love to know, what was the original impetus to write this book in the first place? This is always my favorite question.
Yeah. For as long as I remember, I knew I wanted to write a book. And so I have a 15-year-old daughter, right? I have a teenager. And I always knew, I don't think I said it so out loud because it's like, oh, you should have two kids. I'm like, oh, I just really want one. And I knew that I wanted a human child and I wanted a book child, right? Like I knew those were my contributions. I'm really glad that my daughter came first. But it's like when then all the, after when she was 2 and everyone's like, oh, are you going to have the second one? I'm like, I don't want a second human baby. I want a book baby. Right. And so, and I was like whispering it because it was like much to my mom's chagrin, right? She would have rathered another human baby. I'm like, no, like, and my husband is also a writer. And so we just knew that our ideal family structure was a family of 3 and then all of our creative books. And so I just knew that. And then I knew that the time that I had lived in Oaxaca in my early 20s after college was so impactful in helping me redefine wealth. And so for me, it was like, okay, how do I bring part story? Like I knew it wasn't going to be a memoir, but how do I bring part story with part framework of all the things I have learned along the way in working with clients and also what I know about my industry? And so, it was very amorphous at the beginning. I'm like, how is this all going to fit? And, I have written 10 drafts. And even when I got
Oh,
the contract with the traditional publishing house, what I submitted, because what I kind of did a little bit backwards, where I had a fully finished manuscript by the time I then wrote the book proposal and then got a contract. But I would say of that fully finished manuscript, 50% made it into the final copy. So it's been a
yeah.
lot of iterations.
It's so interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because I think that happens often with
Yeah.
nonfiction,
Yeah.
especially a first book. And people are so concerned about getting everything perfect with their manuscript or their proposal. And it's like, yeah, you want to do a good job, but it may
No,
be
they're going to
something
change
very
it.
different you end up. Yeah.
They're going to change it. So don't stress out
Yeah.
about it. I would have been
Yeah.
so less stressed if I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say there's so much that I now talk about. I mean, my book came out in January, right? It's still a baby. It's not even a year old. And there's so much that I now share. I'm like, oh, that's actually not in the book. And that's okay, right? What I would tell authors, again, I'm still a baby author, but I'm an author, is that, the book has a life of its own. And now that it's out in the world, I get to engage with it much like my readers get to engage with it. So I'm still learning from the book. And what I talk about sometimes, like when I give keynote talks or when I do interviews and podcasts, new material comes out, which again doesn't live in the book, but it lives in the podcast, it lives in the talk. And so
Yeah.
it is an alive entity that's going to have a life of its own. So and I will guilty, we try to put too much pressure on getting everything in there. And I mean, my editor took out 46,000 words. I have a whole section on money archetypes that did not make the book. And I'm like, okay, it's my freebie on my website. Awesome. Right? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe one day it becomes a second book. Maybe it doesn't. Well, you'll never run out of material. Like, I'll never retire from this work because it's continuing to reproduce.
Yeah, that's such a good point. For authors that are more on the fiction side or the more creative nonfiction in the sense of like maybe straight up memoir and things like that, I know they might be listening and trying to figure out how does this apply to me? Because it is different in with this
Hmm.
type of book, you know? But I think there's a lot of opportunities that are missed in other genres where they can learn from someone who's doing nonfiction. Because I don't know if this was part of your strategy going in and you can tell us, but for people who are writing creative nonfiction like this or prescriptive nonfiction, we look at the book as a part of our brand. Whereas a lot of
Hmm.
authors are coming in to the situation thinking the book is everything. And I think it's important to take that step back and realize that the book is a part. It's a wonderful, amazing part, but it's not everything.
A
And like
hundred
you just
percent.
mentioned, nothing is lost. You know, you may not
Hmm.
use everything you wrote, but tell us a little bit about that, you know, that it's your freebie on your website. Cause this is something, and if you follow anything that I do, you'll hear me talk from time to time about a freebie or a lead magnet, which is essentially a tool it's a free tool to help people get to know you better. And in that process, you're signing up for the email list of the author. So I'll let you take it from there, but I just wanted to give that context for those who don't know.
Yeah. No, and I would say, I think again, you are right. Nonfiction and fiction are different. I think in the nonfiction world, I would bet, maybe 30% of readers actually finish the whole book. And I think that's a really important piece to, I think in a fiction, you do kind of want to know how the story end, right? But as a
True.
nonfiction author, and I have to be okay with that because I know that there's in the book, maybe there's 10 nuggets and they got two. Awesome. And so knowing that the book doesn't have to hold all the nuggets, I kind of hold it as like, okay, here's my basket of nuggets that I get to share. Some I'm going to share in the book. Yes, if the reader reads all of it, they'll get all 10. Some I'm going to share on my website. Some I'm going to share in my one-to-one sessions with clients. I'm going to share in my keynote talks. Many I'm still discovering. And so I think what I would say is that the visual that's helped me is to envision my book again as this living entity that continues to unfold. It's almost like I can close my eyes and I can see like this erupting volcano of gold. And the reality is that when I published a book, I was probably at the tip of that volcano and I got to crystallize an offering. Even in the second edition that's going to come out, there's been slight changes. I know if I want to do a big major re-edition, that's more work down the line, but it doesn't really matter because I can offer more of that gold that's coming out in very different capacities. I can do a lot of it for free. Like it's been super fun to create the book discussion guides and put it on my website and create a PDF of some of the exercises and put it on the website. I mean, it would be boring if it stopped. It'd be boring if we just tried to capsule it all in a book.
Yeah. Yeah. I so agree. And even though it's different for different genres, I mean, there's so many opportunities, for instance, for fiction.
Totally.
Authors spend so much time with this material and it doesn't all make it in the book, but there's so many different ways now, especially with how easy it is to post things online. And there's so much more to share.
I know, like if with fiction, I'm like, oh, what if you wrote a book and then you have a Substack that tells all the mini stories of the authors that didn't make it into the book, but that give it, because the reality is with fiction, I end the book, I'm like, I want more, right? It's like goes back to that
Yeah.
scarcity brain. I want more. And so there's so many ways and so many amazing technological tools to add and build the engagement with your reader, that don't make the book, right? That's why people write sequels and prequels and
Yeah. Yeah. And
mhm,
fan fiction and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny too, because I think that again, it's a mindset issue where we think, well, I don't want to be talking about myself too much. But when you're writing about these things, it's not yourself. It's about this
mhm,
bigger idea or this story or whatever. That's what we're all here for, you know? And it
totally.
brings us
Yeah.
together too.
Mhm,
It's yeah, I think I am a believer, at least with the types of people that I tend to work with, that we all have these kind of callings or obsessions that we were given. And when we pursue them, we are fulfilling our part of the puzzle, and it's something that's needed. The reason we
mhm,
have it, the reason we are so devoted to it is because someone needs it. And sometimes we have to
mhm,
remind ourselves of that though, because we get so lost in whatever other stories we may have grown up with and think,
100%.
that we're not very wealthy in that way. So when you came into the author branding program, you, if I remember correctly, you had this career as a financial advisor, and now you were starting to get comfortable with adding this additional new
Hmm.
title of author to it.
Hmm.
How did that change how you looked at yourself overall, or your brand overall?
It's a great question. I mean, a part of me is I've always wanted to call myself an author. And so when I was going through the brand strength modules, it was so conceptual, right? But what I loved about all the modules, I mean, what I loved about your program just in general was just how structured it was, and you took me on a journey, right? It's like answer this question, do this exercise. And for me as a I mean, I'm a planner, right? And so I'm like, take me on a journey. And you took me on a journey, which was amazing, because then you helped me start to see what are all those aspects that being an author entail, right? Things that it's not my industry. And so I'm like, I know my industry, but I don't know the book industry or the publishing industry, or much less the marketing the book industry. And so I think what was helpful was just the organized nature of introducing all the aspects in bite-sized portions that I could then digest. I could then, I had my little Google Doc that I would take your questions, and I would create my little Google Doc with those answers. And it was almost like a midwife, right? It's like, it's kind of like asking, how did you feel after giving birth? Did you feel like you were a parent? And that doesn't quite happen on day one, because you're like, wait a second, baby's not saying mama yet. So I don't know if I'm a parent or my kid. So, but what your program did, Andrea, was like help me roll up the sleeves and feel that I was in a birthing process, and give me a sense of where I was going, what I could control and what I couldn't control. And again, for people who do this in addition to other careers, I didn't have the time to do a lot of this research myself. And so to have that bundled in a process and a package was extremely helpful. And every time I would make time to sit down and do this, like I would carve out, 3 hours on a Friday, for several Fridays in a row, I would carve that
Yeah.
out, and it would allow me to then take time to solidify that that is where I was going. And I think that's really important, because I speak with a lot of first time authors who will report back that when they get the box with their books, it feels very anticlimactic, because you do feel like you're waiting for someone to like knight you with a sword, or put on the crown, or put on the cape. Like you're imagining this big fanfare. And the book comes out, you record your little video, you post it somewhere, and you're like, wait, was that it? And so I think there's a gradual growing into the identity. And I had someone in my book journey ask me, and maybe it was you, like, what is my most important metrics of success? And it was really helpful to know that before I published, because so for me, I was like, actually, I want to throw a book party. I'm like, is that possible?
I
Is that what
remember
people
this.
do?
Yeah.
Remember this? We had this conversation, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do, my I will do a book tour, and my publishing house helped me find what were the local bookstores, both in the Bay Area and also in New Orleans, where I had family. But I was like, what I really want to do is throw a party, because guess what? I've been writing this for 10 years. My friends know about it. Can we just celebrate? And so
Totally.
that was super helpful, because the box arrived, and my party was going to be 4 days later. And so I'm like, okay, I wasn't crowned when the box arrived, but guess what? At the party, I was able to cheers and celebrate and dance and laugh and high five my friends. And that is what made the final identity shift become real. Like I was witnessed in having become an author. And I think that was probably the best advice I could have received, was to be like, what are your metrics of success? Because if you're not clear, it can feel anticlimactic.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. It is so crucial. That's like the first thing we start with in the program. And
Yeah.
with any client is, okay, what's your ideal vision? What does this
Yeah.
look like for you? Because I see so many times with authors, if you don't set that intention or acknowledge what it is for you in the beginning, you can get taken down some roads that just are completely out of alignment with who you are and what you want.
And what I
And you
would add to that is asking, not just what's your vision, but how do you want to feel, right?
Yes.
And what emotion do you want? Because I think for me, what was important is like I couldn't quite see it in that moment when you asked me, but I'm like, but I know I want there to be dancing because I feel
Yes.
so happy dancing, right? And so I think people draw a blank. Like asking the question, how do you want to feel, and what do you see your
Yes.
body doing is helpful. And what was interesting, but like my first event, even before the big dance party, was my first little book event, public book event, was a Zumba class. Come to this open air Zumba class and I will sign and sell books, even before the bookstore. And it was so fun. And so, again, how do we make this fun, right? And so, for some people, it can be that. For some people, it's like, maybe they want to do a book event out in nature because that's where they feel most alive, or at their
Yeah.
spiritual center, or at their I think we just need to be more creative on how we birth these books, because the more fun you have, the better book parent you'll be.
Totally. I love this. You're carrying this analogy through so well. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm like, it is my book baby. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone's different and we
Mhm,
operate differently. We need to understand how to reward ourselves and how to work towards what we actually want, because there
mhm,
will inevitably be decisions on the path that you can either move closer to your dream or further from it. And
100%.
you've got to have some kind of compass uh, to get through that. So, what were some of the most useful and effective things that you did around preparing for your book to come out and the book launch period and, beyond?
Yeah, I would say having a super clear Amazon review team. And this was something that my publishing house was very good at. It's like I hired a PR team outside because I'm like, okay, my publishing house isn't necessarily going to help me with my PR. I knew that it's a small independent house, but they were great at helping me organize this campaign. And what it did is like I reached out to probably 120 people. And I sent them a very kind of heartfelt email. And I said, look, I would love for you to help me give my book like the best first push right into the world. And here's the ask, right? And so the ask is I'm going to organize you all to 4 groups so that I would stagger the reviews over 4 weeks. The first group coming out the first week of my book, etc. And this is what I need you to do in terms of review. Here are some sample templates, make it your own. So I think getting the sample templates was great. And I learned the hard way, Andrea, that you can't, they can add pictures, but you can't be in the picture, right? I went to dinner with friends and a friend snapped a picture with me in the book. Amazon didn't approve that, right? And so I learned some things of what to do, what not to do.
Yeah.
And then I offered 4 things that I did 4 things that they could do and that I would give in terms of tokens of gratitude. So one is my unconditional appreciation. Another one, I created a Tumblr or a journal or just some kind of like giveaways with swag from my book. That was fun to do as well. And I gave them the choice of picking what their thank you token was, right? Or it could just be you send handwritten notes, etc. But I think, I was able within a month to get probably 70 reviews, which was huge, right? And,
Yeah.
I'm about to cross over 100 reviews and people read them. I can't tell you how many times I'd meet someone and they'd look on Amazon and be like, oh my gosh, you have a ton of reviews. I'm like, yep. And so you could argue, did you game the system? I'm like, no. People read the book because here's the other thing that you do is that you can send them an advanced galley, right? That you get. And so I sent them the galley. Some of them printed out the whole thing because they prefer to read that way. And so and most of them did take nuggets that were important to them. But I think hands down, that was the most cost effective promoting that I could have done because it's people who love you. And the way that it works best if they buy the book from the same platform that they're posting the review. So it helps with pre-sales. And so hands down, that's the one thing I tell all authors, have a super organized campaign. I kept a spreadsheet. I tell people, let me know when the review goes up. I would check in. I'd have someone else review if it wasn't a good read through, if it wasn't a good review. Like you have to kind of get over that. And generally speaking, these are the good reviews. So they're fun to read. And I think that was the best thing I could control. Because there's so much we
Yeah.
can't control. But that
Yes.
one, I had a lot of fun. People in my world really showed up for me. And again, does not cost a lot of dollars. I hired a PR team that did cost a lot more dollars, but in my world, it was worth it because I was like, you know what? I'm not here to be a multiple book author. Like maybe I write a second one. I don't need to write a second one. So I'm like, I'm going to give it the best shot. And so I hired a PR team for 5 months. And, I was on 55 podcasts and I got interviews with Forbes and The Guardian and New York Times and Oprah Daily. Like it was worth it because I was able to put all of that on my website and I got some speaking arrangements from it, etc. But that's more on the expensive side. So you have the extreme, right? You have the what can you do low budget? What can you do high budget? I did hire some social media help for a while and that was helpful. I go back and forth in terms of what results that actually has. I mean, I have a very pretty Instagram page and I'm like, meh, do I want to continue that long term? And
Yeah.
then I was super clear on what type of launch I wanted. And so again, the Zumba class cost me nothing because everyone paid for their Zumba ticket. I just bought books and I sold them, right? Like the party was much more expensive, right? But I had equally fun in both. And so it's like, what makes this feel like fun? Make it feel fun.
Yeah. I love that. I also think that it's such a good point to bring up that you did a Zumba class because so often authors are thinking literary and like, oh, I'll go do a reading in a bookstore. And that's kind of the most boring option, guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your ideal reader isn't just a person that reads this one type of book and that's all they do with their life. They have other
Yeah.
interests.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And I would say too, is even in the readings at the bookstore, my agent gave me this tip and I thought it was really good. I only read very little. Right? Like I've been to readings where like, oh my God, you just read me the whole freaking first chapter. Don't read me the first chapter. Read only a little and tell the story of what inspired you to read the book. Like if they're going to see you live, don't tell them something that they can get from the book. Tell them something that they wouldn't get from reading the book. And then they want to go buy the book, right? And so I had super successful readings because I really told my story and made it come alive. And what
Yep.
my first reading sounded like, I mean, like to the fifth one, I'm like, oh, I improved dramatically over 5 of
Yes.
these. The first one, I was like, was that coherent? Right. And everyone was happy with it. But I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
God. And
Yeah.
that's
Was I in the
okay.
fugue
Right.
state? I don't even know.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm like, what did I just
Yeah.
talk about? But people want to hear the story behind the book more than the reading of the book.
Totally. Totally.
In
And
fact, in my
I
first
think,
reading, I forgot to read anything. And then Andrea, my practice manager, was there. She's like, you didn't read anything. I'm like, oops, next time. Okay.
that's the thing. It's like
Yeah.
treat it like it's an experiment. And I think to your point, the more you can make it fun, then even if you don't do it
Yeah.
perfectly, at least you had fun. And then the next time you know what you can do better. And it's an
Yeah.
evolution.
And you know what I also did, Andrea, is that I staggered my friends. I had 5 local readings and I knew at least 3 people who were going to attend each. And I'm like, you know what? Worst case scenario, I see them, the 3 of them, and we go have dinner afterwards. But that helped my nerves of like, is anyone going to show up? Right? Because you don't know that. But the fact that I had 3 friends at each one and literally went and had dinner either before or after, again, I made it a fun night and I was less attached to who came.
So smart. I love that. So we've talked a lot about money mindset. How did mindset play a role in actually birthing this book into the world and marketing it?
It's a great question. So I think 2 things just come top of mind. So one, I remember I interviewed a lot of recently published authors in the process. And I remember one told me, be prepared to spend on your book. And I asked her outright, I'm like, how much did you spend? And we had that conversation. I was like, okay. And so I think it was the best advice she could have given me, which is like, be prepared to spend on your book. Because I'm like, okay, like it's an investment. It's a business. I'm an entrepreneur. I know that you have to spend business capital. You got to spend money to make money. But it was helpful to hear it said out loud. And I think the other piece was like, okay, I kept thinking in terms of like, because what I obviously paid in my PR, marketing, or branding, I'm like, that didn't go into this year's retirement account, right? And I kept having that conversation with my future self and my present self to be like, if I were to pass tomorrow, right, what is that responsible level of investment that keeps my present self not stressed because I can still pay my bills? That is in conversation with my future self that at some point, right, what am I going to pass on to the next generation? And what is equally important to pass on to my daughter, my human daughter, in my book baby? And the reality is, it's like my book baby needed it now, not then, right? Because at this point, I'm like, book baby has a life of its own and it's outside of my control. And so, I do this for a living. I live in spreadsheets. I, track my money very consciously, I would say. And I started mapping it out. And then I also knew that in some cases I'm like, okay, I need to go earn some more income to pay for this. What does that take? And so I was able to map that out and make the commitment.
I love that. It
Hmm.
is important. We have to invest in our creative dreams, and that
100%.
may look different for one person to the other, whether it's financial or energetic or whatever it is, but
Yeah. And I
it
will
is an
say, Andrea,
investment.
one of the things that I loved about your offering is that it was right in that sweet spot where I'm like, okay, it's like mini economies of scale. I can join a cohort, right? And which is less expensive than one-on-one branding support. I mean, so amazingly incredible, the resource that you've created. And I got the added benefit of being in a group of women who we were talking through these concepts with. And so funny enough, I'm like, is this really economies of scale or is this a win-win on my app? Right. Where I'm like, I get right to, because you
Yeah.
have to map like how much you spend on branding, how much you spend on the website, how much you spend on a photo shoot. You have to map it out. And your program really fit in a way that gave me the tools I needed for branding and marketing, allowing me to keep resources to do other things, and gave me the cohort of sisterhood of other women. And I would say one of the biggest takeaways, like, I would have done your program sooner. Like, I wish I would have
Mm.
done it earlier in my writing career because I had to rush. If you remember, I'm like, I have deadlines. And so, there was some calls I couldn't join just because I'm like, my final draft is due in 2 days.
Right.
I wish I would have started sooner because I think the concepts I could have taken a little bit more time to marinate. I mean, I got so much out of it, but that's what I'd tell people: start that process sooner than you think.
Thank you so much for all those kind words.
Hmm.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And that's so true. People often think, oh, once I get in promotion mode, that's when I'll start. And
No.
it's like, no, take the time
Start tutor.
beforehand.
Yeah, because there's like it goes by quick once you get in that
It
stage.
does. It does.
Hmm. So
Well, I wish we could talk for 2 more hours, but I know our time is up and you have to get along in your day. So thank you again so much for being here. I will make sure that we have all your links and everything at the end of this episode so people can find out more about your book and all the other things that you're doing in the world.
thank you, Andrea. Such a
Thank
pleasure
you
to be
so
here.
much.
Such an amazing community you've built, and so excited for more people to join.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been an honor.
You're welcome. Yay.